Hello, everyone, and welcome to the IMCSB podcast with me, Miriam Scarpa. And today we have another co-host who is Giovanni. Hi, Giovanni. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hello, my name is Giovanni. I'm a first-year PhD student in the Institute. I work with Professor Garrett Jenkins in the Bar Building on plant UVB perception. And I'm happy to be here.
Well, welcome. So thank you for co-hosting with me this podcast, and this is a special one. So this will be the first one of a series about work-life balance. And in this podcast, we'll be interviewing Lydia Bach, who started a Wellcome Trust funded position to support staff in our institute with work-life balance. Lydia, would you like to tell us what your work involves?
Thank you so much for having me. Yes, so I started my position in February, and the position is very much project coordinating work-life balance initiatives at the Institute, because a previous survey suggested that about half of the staff struggle with getting their work-life balance right. So my role is very much about exploring what some of the challenges are in achieving healthy work-life balances. That can be, larger systemic or smaller individual challenges. And I'm looking at academic staff, technicians, and admin staff. And I suppose finding out what the issues and challenges are, finding out what works, and then designing initiatives around solving some of the issues we can address.
That's cool. Definitely would be very useful in, especially for this academic environment. So, is there any specific project you've been working on recently?
Yes. So I started off with some informal, semi-structured interviews of staff across the whole range of academics, technicians, and so on, just to chat a little bit about what their perceptions were about work-life balance, what they found really helpful at the Institute, some of the things we could be improving. And from that, I wrote a preliminary report and discussed that with the senior management team and my line manager. I'm now working on a more formalized survey so we get better data on the sort of challenges and we can invite more staff to provide us with insights. I'm also revamping the website, the work-life balance website and information. We're currently working with organizational development on an inclusive leadership pilot project, which is very exciting. But we're also working on initiatives and courses that can support staff, and of course, this podcast and some other smaller bits and bobs like staff profiles, highlighting the diversity at the Institute and so on.
Yeah, that sounds very interesting. I wanted to ask you, before we move into actually the details of what you've been doing, how did you get to this position in terms of your, career choices before this position?
Yeah, great question. So I did my PhD at Queen's University Belfast, who have Athenas One Gold, actually. So they have some really innovative initiatives that really drive progress with respect to inclusivity, diversity, equality. And that's where I got involved into Athenas One SAT team there. And then I moved into Glasgow Barkham Institute, where I did a postdoc with Jan Lindstrom and Dan Hayden. And when I was there, I was on the Athenas One SAT team of that institute, but I also was really involved in mental health and well-being initiatives and I suppose internal postdoc support networks and mentoring. And that sort of engaged my interest in developing that skill set a little bit further. And when I read about the position, I applied, and here I am. It's very exciting.
Interesting. Thank you. I also want to, I guess, since you mentioned it, how does this, I know Athenas One is very important within the university and there's been put a lot of effort into this initiatives. So how does this, your role in this project that you mentioned kind of fit in within the Athenas One goals and charter?
Yes, I think, at the Institute, we're thinking more and more about how we can make the workplace more inclusive. So I think the way we're working within Athenas One now is going to be very much focusing on being able to bring your whole self to work. So that is that idea centering around psychological safety in work, people feeling like work's a safe place where they can discuss and voice their opinions, their ideas, and it feels welcoming. And I think under that general umbrella of bringing yourself to work, there are a number of initiatives associated with, disability, BAME, LGBTQIA+, that relate all to that idea that we want the institute to become more inclusive and equal, and people feeling at home and people feeling like they can be safe at work. So I think this all feeds towards this goal of achieving psychological safety in the workplace.
Yeah, that's a great answer. And actually, I didn't think of Athenas One being kind of trying to make work safe for everyone. And I think that's a really nice word kind of to put it in. Your PhD was in Belfast. And then what inspired you? Was it just the Athenas One there? Because you said they had Athenas One Gold. Is that what inspired you to kind of go on, leave basic research and go on to this work-life balance and supporting people?
Yes, I think I'm very much driven by, in terms of personality, perhaps feeling like I'm making an impact or make a difference in some ways. So when I was doing my PhD and my postdoc, I felt like that work is highly impactful in terms of understanding anthropogenic impacts on ecosystems. But then I also found that just working on initiatives like peer support initiatives, postdoc, and PhD support forum, that was also giving me a lot of motivation and a sense of fulfillment. So for me, and I'm really enjoying talking to lots of different people and addressing some of the issues that we can address from sort of on the ground. So that's why it feels quite an organic switch for me, because I'm just working on trying to find solution to a different problem that hopefully makes a difference to people.
Oh, that's really nice. Well, thank you for your help in the Institute, first of all.
I guess this is your experience could also be, an example for people in the issue, in the sense that you might do a PhD because you're interested in, research and stuff, but you might not necessarily want to spend your whole life doing that. And there's lots of things you can do with that experience. And so it's important for people to realize that they're not pressured into doing anything they don't want to do. So in terms of, psychological health and mental health, and it's important for that, I think, to realize that for a young student.
Yes, and I also think, the sort of PhD postdoc gives people such a wide range of skill set and experiences that they could ultimately consider, loads of different roles within the university that they might really enjoy, like myself in this case. And I think the career service is doing a little bit on that as well, looking at the different roles people can have in the university, teaching, admin, human resources type stuff.
How did you find the transition from kind of research, more academic, to more supportive a role?
It's a really hard question. Actually, I didn't find that too bad. Maybe perhaps because I had been doing a little bit of that sort of work already on the side. So it was nice to fully be able to focus and expand on that. What I'm currently not missing as much is coding. So
I could tell.
yes, it's
Yeah, code is a hard one.
So I think it was fine. I think with a lot of the skills we're already doing on the day-to-day as academics, I think you're doing in similar jobs too, which is chatting, negotiating, meeting setting, and so on. So, and that's why I think also it's important for people to consider, career alternative doesn't mean you're necessarily switching to a huge extent in terms of the skill set, or you're feeling left behind. I think you can transition quite smoothly into something else.
That's good. Well, thanks. Because I'm sure many of the CR PhD students, but also postdoc and everyone else would be kind of interested in perhaps transition into a different role, which is, it might seem like quite different from research.
Came to me another question about this, since you mentioned different aspects of, PhDs or postdocs, and all positions have different components to the work you're doing. So, based on your experience, but also maybe the surveys you've been doing, have you found that there's different aspects or activities within certain positions that have a larger impact on work-life balance for different people? Or is it more of a just general problem?
I think it's context dependent. The survey we had run previously suggested that in particular research and teaching staff can have a tough time with work-life balance. And I think that probably relates to all of the activities they need to undertake at the same time. I think similarly, you can have a PhD student who has a particularly challenging time in the lab because they run a certain experiment at the time, or that just feels a sort of constant level of baseline pressure. For the senior academics, I think, they are doing a lot of different tasks all of the time. So grant writing, publication, public engagement, marking, teaching, pastoral care. I think that's a huge challenge. And for the more early career researchers, that also varies on a sort of case by case basis, depending on what your PhD or postdoc is and what the focus is on. I think if you're having a heavily lab-based component, that might increase the pressure at certain amount of at certain times, whereas you can also be someone who works with a large data set that's already available but has to do so much data manipulation and sifting and analysis that you're in a very same position.
Yeah, definitely see how more PIs and people further along in their career might have more to do, but also more experience to draw on for balancing. While I said maybe early career researchers and PhDs might struggle more because they still don't know exactly how to balance it all. So there's definitely challenges with all this, and we're all aware of the problems that there might be for academics and other kinds of problems like that. But do you think this is more of a kind of systemic problem, as in all academia, or there's also things that are specific to the university or not?
It's a really difficult question. I'm starting to think of this like an onion. So I think the outer peel is the sort of academic system we exist in, where there is the pressure to publish, there is the pressure to get grants, that I think puts a lot of pressure on people on an individual level. For example, on PIs, that might then pressure their early career researchers or their PhDs. And I think that same pressure applies on a sort of smaller individual level, where they feel that pressure coming down systemically, but they're also perhaps internalizing the pressure and working in a way that isn't necessarily benefiting them for their mental health, but also for their level of productivity. Because I think, the reality is, as you all know, 60-hour weeks might work for 1 or 2 weeks of intensive lab work and field sampling, but that might not necessarily increase your productivity on long term. So it's also individual reflection about the way people work and the way they engage and what they agree to doing and how they engage with their line managers and so on. So I think it's a whole number of issues that interact with each other that cause work-life balance challenges. And also something I think that's really important to highlight, academia for many is a vocation. So when we talk about work-life balance, you might choose to work 50, 60 hours, and that's your choice because that's your passion, and that's fine. That's as acceptable as someone saying, I'm working within my contracted hours, and then I'm going home and that's it. We're trying to just emphasize that people can reflect on how much they're doing and what they're doing. And they should have a choice, and they should be supported by the institute and by the university and by the policies of the university to achieve what they choose to achieve in terms of work-life balance.
Thank you. Yeah, so exactly, you said that it's a bit individual, but then I don't know if you know the answer to this question, but overall, do you think, or what is the general thoughts about, for example, public engagement? So of course, we know it's a big part of academia and of research environments. So is public engagement part of the work or of the life?
Yeah, I think this actually highlights something that is a systemic issue, but also perhaps more an internal university issue. I think right now we don't value the work and the things people do that are in grants or publications as much. So because in my opinion, a lot of academia is taxpayer funded, we should have outreach components within research we're doing. And yet, for a lot of that means people have to do it in addition to the main focus, which is publication and grant writing. So I guess, and I had this conversation with several staff members, we need to start thinking about ways of valuing different outputs of research. And I think public engagement should be a valued research output as much as a publication. I don't know what your opinion is on that.
Yeah, I guess it is kind of is a difficult one, I know, because myself, I have done public engagement in various means. So I've done public engagement with the lab. So for example, going to the Explorathon, which is like during the day. So it could have been like a Friday. Or I've done Pint of Science. So Pint of Science more in the evening, and then it's not part of my lab work. So I feel it's more like a hobby. So it's really, yeah, it's difficult, but definitely when we have, for example, the Explorathon, I always think, oh, I need to make up for that time that I've not spent in the lab. Well, my project is experiment based, so it's lab based. So big part of my thesis would be mostly stuff done in the lab. But yeah, it's difficult because it sounds like it could be a hobby because it's more fun, and it's not. You can't really publish about that. But it's work after all, and there's also a lot of time spent behind it, I think, because even the activity we brought at the Riverside Museum for Explorathon, we had to spend some time coloring in or thinking what we want to do, or printing out, or pre-cutting stuff for the kids and stuff like that, which I didn't feel was part of my work, but it also was.
Yeah, and I think the sort of traditional narrative around this is that gives you a whole set of extra skills that will be useful in the future and is really good for your CV, which I agree with. And I think, that probably comes with it. But at the same time, I do think we need to start appreciating the time people spend on activities like outreach in a more measurable way. Because it's an excellent activity, and as tax-funded scientists, it's probably something we should do and should do better when we want to start communicate the great challenges that we're facing.
Yes, actually, now that you mention it, I think it's so important for people to do outreach because, we see it more and more recently with all the problems we've been having in our societies. Like, people are starting to feel like, not trust scientists, or like not necessarily trust expertise as much, or like having doubts about what the science is telling us. And I think even teaching students and PhDs how to be a good communicator of their science to somebody who does not have a PhDs and 10 years of experience in your field, it's very important, because that's how you make sure everyone is on the same page on the issues that then matter. That's, of course, beside the point, I guess, of our institute's work-life balance. But, I thought it was very important to mention this.
Yeah, definitely. I was wondering if you had the chance to have maybe a chat with PIs and more senior stuff about this. So I feel like sometimes CCRs and PhD students are the most involved in more public engagement because, as you said, this is also part of CV building. So that's how I see it as well. There are lots of transferable skills that are helpful for who's still growing in their career a lot. Yeah, so have you had the chance to speak to PIs and seniors managers and see what they think about this?
Yes, I think there's a general acknowledgement that public outreach is a useful and important component that provides people with a whole range of skills and also can, shine a light on the research that's been done. At the same time, I think I guess the PIs are always managing time. So there's probably, I wouldn't say a concern, but, an acknowledgement of the challenge of, what are you contracted out to work on and what is extra work, like you've said previously, is it a hobby or is it part of your work? And I think, and this probably reflects the university and PIs across the university in general. There will be some PIs that feel like they trust their students and their early career researchers, and they can engage with this sort of public outreach component, and some who might think that their focus should lie in doing the sort of science rather than engagement.
Oh, that's interesting. So did you feel like it was more like a kind of two views, or did you feel like one was more prevalent than the other? It's complete two views.
I thought there were more two views than I thought it was a sort of that two views were quite balanced across the more senior staff.
And did you feel, I wonder if that's also dependent on how much public engagement they do themselves?
I think
wonder.
So. Yes.
Yeah, so probably the ones that do more public engagement feel like it should be more part of the work.
Exactly. And also those that are doing more and encourage their, PhDs and ECRs more are also more willing to consider how we can better account for that or reward people for this sort of work.
Yeah. So I think, you mentioned public engagement. I think in a way you could think, or people could think, that senior academics, one of the ways they do, engagement with a larger audience, not necessarily the larger public as you can call it, but I've always thought that senior academics kind of have to teach in a way, like that's progressing in your career, it's teaching is included. And to be fair, at biology, for example, here in the University of Glasgow, could reach 500-600 students that might not necessarily all be going towards doing science. They might just be taking the course. So how is teaching a part of this work-life balance in a way? Like, it's a very important skill and it's a lot of work, but also I've never really got how this is assigned in a way. Do the people get to choose? I want to do teaching, I don't want to do teaching, or are they more like, is it given to people, okay, you're good at teaching, do teaching, and then this might give you extra work that you don't necessarily have time for?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. Actually, I think previously teaching roles were allocated a little bit ad hoc and perhaps to just people who either slot in or have put themselves forward. Now, I think within the institute that's changed significantly because there was an acknowledgement that the teaching responsibility may have fallen more so on people who are good at it or who sort of volunteered for it. So now it goes through Neil and Darren. Any sort of teaching assignment that's set up will go through Neil and Darren, which means that I think the decisions are made much more fair and it's more balanced who gets to teach what, rather than small internal conversations that are resulting in teaching being allocated more randomly. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I think that makes perfect sense. Although, I can see how, you want to have the best professors we have teach the students. There's obviously going to be people who are more inclined, more, naturally gifted at public speaking or just communicating with an audience like students. We all know as students that you will have lecturers who are more gifted at teaching than others. But you also want to have a fair distribution and not just have, two people who are great teachers do everything and kind of have to let go of the research. Maybe they don't want to do so.
Yeah. And I think traditionally, people are in a sort of unconscious way more likely to allocate teaching to those who can do it better, or to those who are particularly good at, pastoral care roles and stuff. I think that's definitely the case, but there has been a real focus to consider teaching allocation in a more structured way, and that's what they've been moving towards. And I think that's probably it's very challenging, because the question is, right, if someone teaches really well, do you allocate all of the teaching to them, or do you encourage staff members that may not be as charismatic or engaging to do more teaching? It's a really tough question. So I think perhaps the way it's done now, which is sort of discussion and allocation in a very official way, is better, because people don't slip under the radar as much.
Yeah, definitely. So moving on instead to, I think there's a similar, question that I think is even less considered for ECRs and PhD students. And is like, we as PhD students, of course, we don't do any teaching, but we do GTA work and demonstrating work, which I personally enjoy very much. And so I want to ask about this because, as I've done some work this first year as a GTA, and it's, it can take a fair amount of time out of your, week. And I don't know if you've ever had this come up when you're talking to ECRs regarding, like, you might feel like, okay, you're getting paid on top of your studentship or whatever your funding is, and you're taking time away from it. So I sometimes feel like, it's great work and you're asked to do it, but then at the same time it's like, okay, where is the line? How much can I do? And it's another thing that adds on to your work-life balance thoughts.
It's very similar to the public outreach question, except for at least you get paid for GTA work, I guess. I think the teaching, though, in some ways almost can get you a wider range of skills than some of the public outreach work. And also, I think it's a little bit more quantifiable in a way that someone within the School of Biological Sciences, or if you apply for a university job or teaching job, could read what you have been doing. I also, so in some ways, but that's just my opinion, it's almost easier to quantify the skills you get out of that compared to some of the public outreach stuff. And I also think the university, in particular with the LEADS team, have been really thinking about how they can increase the skill set. So you can become associated recognizing excellent for teaching fellow now, which puts you through a set of training modules where you have to show your ability to teach, but also where you learn a little bit more about, I guess, teaching scholarship. So I think the university is really trying to see those teaching, which is great money and great skills, as a skill set that they can quantify much better, so that when you come out of it, when you come out of the PhD or postdoc, you can say, I've been engaged in teaching practice in a more formalized manner. So I think it's a great opportunity.
Yeah, I also agree with you, because I also do my fair amount of GTA and I really enjoy it. And I've been doing both GTA, also marking, which is not as enjoyable as teaching in the labs. But yeah, so just talking about the LEADS program that you just mentioned. So would this kind of teaching excellence fellowship be for PhD students, or like it would be like a different position? Because I think that's where a bit of a gray area stands, because of course I'm at uni, well, I'm a PhD student and my studentship covers my PhD work, and for example, my flatmate, she's in social sciences, and so it's a different institute, totally different, but like they are more teaching orientated. So even though they do have these extra contracts as GTA, is much more accepted, or much more, kind of accepted within the institute or the school, that they would do like a fair amount of teaching, which would be replacing their time, or it would be done during the time where they expect to do a PhD. And yeah, I think it's quite difficult to find difference. Plus, I know that postdocs can't really get paid.
Yeah. So there's like three things you bring up here, and it's quite interesting because I just had a conversation with someone about this issue. So I think within the sort of life science MVLS institute, teaching is very much an add-on, and you're probably expected to do that in addition rather than it being integrated. I'm not sure if that's a good thing. I think if we're trying to develop people's skill set, they should really be part of that. This recognizing excellent in teaching fellowship that GTAs can do as an associate fellowship by Leeds is quite good in that it recognizes that people do a lot of this stuff, and it trains people in these different teaching options, also, lab groups, small groups, large groups, disabilities, and so on. And I think it's good because you guys have 10 days of continuous professional development. So in theory, you have the right to do this particular thing that would really add to the CV, I think. The second issue you address is the issue that postdocs aren't getting paid for teaching. That's a general issue I think the university is quite aware of, and they have been discussing, because, the postdocs, they still want to get teaching experience, but I think they're also time pressed, and they're then not even getting paid for the time. That's an issue. And I think Leeds in particular are having these discussions with the university more broadly about how this could be contracted out. Another issue the early career researchers have that the PhDs might not have is that while Leeds has the recognizing excellent for teaching training associate thing, there's nothing that would allow the early career researchers postdoc to do something similar. So they can either go and do a GTA-like course, or they have to do the PG cap, which they're unlikely to get in because that's for lecturers. So at the moment, there is a little bit of a empty space for postdoc to really find a teaching course that acknowledges the additional work or whatever else they might do compared to PhDs, but a little bit less than a lecturer position. And I think they're also quite aware and working on that.
Yeah, rather than an empty space, they just said, I think there's just a missing space for that, because there's no in between the GTA and the lecturing.
Yes.
Yeah, it's really true. Yeah, because of course there's these kind of two sides of academia, which are like the research and the teaching, and I do think it's not factored in sometimes, or a lot. But I think it is one of the systemic challenges that you mentioned earlier. Another thing is that, as you said, even GTA work demonstrating teaching is part of our skills development, but also we are actually teaching. So I do spend a lot of time talking to undergrad students or master students and trying to explain techniques or how things work in the lab, or especially this year, I've done quite a lot of demonstrating from home. So it's been quite hard to engage them through Zoom or Microsoft Teams or whatever, or trying to make them kind of imagine how it would be in the lab and stuff like that. So I don't think it's just like me developing teaching skills, but also I am providing teaching to the institute or the school as well.
Absolutely.
So I think that should be also considered, because we are paid for it. That's why we're paid. But yeah, so just going back to just the systemic challenges that we're talking, I was wondering if you have found out any maybe other systemic challenges that you didn't expect, or something else that we've not talked about.
Yeah, I think something that's been highlighted quite a lot in these conversations is in general the awareness of people of the policies that the university has, and how that might apply to them. And I think, in the future, hopefully we can do a little bit more work on informing staff and PhDs and early career researchers on the sort of rights and policies and support mechanisms in place that should allow them to work in different ways. I think coronavirus has really changed and revolutionized the way we're working. I think there is a general consensus that, some home working for let's say 2 or 3 days might actually be beneficial. But, when it comes to considering flexi working, part-time working, condensed working hours, people really have no idea what they could be having conversations with their line managers about that go beyond this traditional 9 to 5 working. So I suppose what we're hoping to do is to clarify some of this a little bit and the different areas of Athenas One. So, the carer, parental, maternity, paternity team, for example, will highlight those policies. And similarly, when it comes to academic misconduct and bullying, we're going to be making it much more clear what internal and external support there is in place and how that can be used, and what people need to provide to maybe report or get support beyond just HR. So that's a thing I think would be useful.
That's great. So actually, since you mentioned this, I've been meaning to ask this before we end this. So now there's definitely resources the university and the institute have for, beside general mental health, but also specifically, work-life balance in the institute. So just wanted to say, what are these resources that are available for students or for PIs? And, maybe some suggestion how or where and how can these be accessed? Are these people or like web pages or any other sort of resources?
Yes, well, it's people, it's web pages. So it's a really difficult question because it really depends on what the challenge is. I think what we need to get better at within the institute and more broadly is having better conversations with line managers about expectations and about what we're hoping to achieve. So this is part where some of the initiatives we're hoping to do, inclusive leaderships and managerial training, come in. There will be a number of initiatives and courses provided in the future that relate to smart working. We're thinking about extending the mentoring initiative. By the time this gets published, hopefully we'll have a work-life balance website available. And on the website, we're going to provide links to internal and external mental health support. That won't just include, counseling from the university, but also some external sources that may react quicker and may be available more readily. We also have all of the reporting websites available for people who might want to report any challenges with their managers. So that can be within the institute, but if you don't want to do that, you can report confidentially to HR, or you can chat to a student volunteer. There are loads of different options. I just think they're not highlighted effectively. By the time this gets aired, you will find them on the website. And I think the university is actively working, on putting more initiatives in place. But what I think is the most important thing is us having these conversations, us highlighting it, but also, and this goes back to sort of assertiveness, really for reflecting on what are your values and what do you want to get out of your work-life balance? How does that align with your PI and your lab? And then how can you negotiate that? So in the future, we're hoping to also do some assertiveness training to just help people get managing better conversations with their line managers around these issues. Because I also appreciate not every line manager may be supportive of certain work patterns. So
I think that's actually great, because I do think that this is something that is maybe not talked about that much, and I think many people are not aware that even you existed maybe within the institute as a supportive of our work-life balance and the safety of our work environment. Yes, I think it's great, this kind of initiative of the, I guess, Wellcome Trust and the Institute is amazing. And definitely your website would be really helpful to everyone from ECRs, I think probably PIs. And you were saying how you're going to try and get facilitate this conversation between ECRs or postdocs with their line manager, but will there be some other activities or workshops or whatever for the line managers instead?
Yes, I'm currently working with organizational development on an inclusive leadership pilot project. And that really centers around that idea of psychological safety. So what we are going to do, and we're in the sort of final stages of designing it, is choose one lab within the institute that are going to try out these ideas of inclusive leadership, open conversations, and changing the way labs are run. And we're hoping that ultimately these ideas and these conversations and the different ways this particular manager PI interacts with their, early career researchers, staff, technicians will help inform how we might consider engaging other managers with it. So it's a sort of leading by example pilot project that's all about that idea of introducing psychological safety to the labs. These are such big questions and such significant challenges that it's really hard to, get everyone to do managerial training and just, I guess, expect people to just be better at it. So I think the way we're addressing it in running this sort of initiative that really asks how can people feel safe and people feel like they can discuss things with their line manager as a pilot project will be really helpful to then have discussions with other managers how they can use these techniques.
That's a great initiative because, in fact, what I've been thinking of is kind of occupational health, how the line manager would be reporting kind of or recommending you for occupational health checks or whatever. But I don't think the line manager would not even being able to recommend that or suggest that if there's not an open conversation, which is often not, especially about mental health and stuff. We know there's a kind of stigma.
Yes.
Which I think is being kind of defeated more and more every day because it's the awareness. That I think everyone is made more aware that this is something.
Yes, and I think the important thing here is that like the way that has changed is because people are sharing their vulnerabilities and they are discussing their experiences. And I think that makes the difference is to be open and to engage in the dialogue and to share things that will ultimately make people feel like they are not going to be exposed or unsafe or worried if they want to share some of the issues and challenges because lots of other people are doing it. So
that's great. That's great. I think. So thank you for being part of this, and
thank you.
And I think we can wrap up because we're gonna continue this conversation anyways in the next couple of podcasts, right? When we're gonna talk also with ACRs or other PhD students, but also with PI and PI's line managers and some of the support staff. But before we wrap up, I would like to end this podcast by asking a quick fire round to get to know you more. So this is a surprise. You did not know about these questions.
Oh, no.
Okay. Yeah. So are you ready? Can I start?
Yes.
Okay. So favorite foods?
Indian food, saag paneer.
Oh, that is a great choice. What is your favorite Indian restaurant in Glasgow, if you have any?
I like banana leaf.
Oh, the one in Byres Road. Yeah, I love that. Favorite city?
Porto in Portugal.
Okay. And favorite musician, band, or music genre?
I like the Strokes, classic indie rock type.
Love that. Yeah. Great choice. And any instrument that you play?
None.
No.
Absolutely no.
Not lockdown hobby then.
I started knitting, but I was too bored by that.
But yeah, a favorite sport?
Swimming in normal times, but I enjoy surfing. I wish I was living by the sea so I could do some surfing.
That's cool. Have you tried to surf in Scotland at all?
Yeah, it's very cold though.
So, favorite film?
Oh, it's very difficult. Maybe It's a Wonderful Life at Christmas time.
Oh, that is cute. Cute, nice. And then favorite TV show?
I watch too much TV now that we're in lockdown. I love Westworld season 1 and 2 in particular. I think are my favorite TV show because it asks big questions about human consciousness.
Favorite book?
The Orphan Master's Son. It's a Pulitzer Prize winning book about an orphan in North Korea and his life. I think it's a beautiful love story.
Oh, that's nice. Well, thank you. These are like a lot of recommendation for us and our listener. But yeah, so that was the last question. Well, thanks again for this, and well, we'll keep this conversation going anyways for the next podcast. So yeah, I think that's it for today.
Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. Bye, everyone.